Ciao a tutti! In questo video abbiamo voluto portarvi oltreoceano per parlarvi di Ron Miksha. Ron è un apicoltore commerciale americano-canadese, geofisico e anche autore di un libro molto interessante chiamato Bad Beekeeping, cioè cattiva apicoltura. Nel libro ci parla di cosa significasse fare apicoltura commerciale a cavallo tra l'America e il Canada tra gli anni 70 e 80. Cura da oltre 20 anni un blog dedicato all'apicoltura, nel quale propone punti di vista originali rispetto a temi molto dibattuti in apicoltura. In aggiunta, Ron sta lavorando per un master in Bee Ecology, vale a dire ecologia delle api, e di cui ci parlerà più avanti nel video. Abbiamo parlato con Ron di cosa significhi fare cattiva apicoltura e di molto altro. Sono disponibili sia i sottotitoli in inglese che in italiano e troverete già anche la timeline suddivisa per argomento. Si tratta di una lunga intervista, quindi non vi rubiamo altro tempo e buona visione!
Ron, thank you very much again for being with us here, and please tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are, your life as a beekeeper.
Yeah, I'd love to, and thank you for inviting me. This is going to be a lot of fun. So, I am a beekeeper of many years' experience. I grew up on a farm that had honeybees. Mm-hmm. We also had crops like peppers and zucchini, tomatoes, and so we live near the city of Pittsburgh in the United States, and Pittsburgh has about a million people, and then small farms around the city. So people would sometimes drive to the farm to buy their vegetables for cooking and so on. And so we didn't go to markets. We had people come to the farm so they could buy from us. And we also had honeybees for pollination on the farm, but also my father was very interested in honeybees. And at one time he was a commercial honeybee keeper when I was a child. And he stopped doing that because he found it more he found that he could make a lot more money by growing vegetables, and also he had greenhouse plants that he sold. Mm-hmm. So that was where he made a lot of money eventually by just being frugal, careful. But he had these bees that he didn't have time for, and I was 16 years old. And he suggested, because I liked the bees a lot, I was very interested in everything about honeybees. He said, well, you have your driver's license, you can drive a truck, and you're 16 years old. Mm-hmm. I want you to run the 300 hives of bees that we had at that time. They were located in 12 different locations, mm-hmm. all within about 50 kilometers of our house. Mm-hmm. So it was my job then to feed the bees, put boxes on, requeen them, control for disease, take care of them. But I had spent 10 years before that, from the time I was quite small, helping with the bees. All right. So it wasn't totally new for me. It was something that I was comfortable doing. So that was my start. And this was in the United States, in Pennsylvania, mm-hmm. and I kept honeybees as part of our farm. I continued and finished high school, so the bee work was mostly in the summer and fall, and then I was in school. And when I finished school, I continued another year in Pennsylvania with bees, and then took all the bees to Florida for the winter. Right. Now that's 2,000 kilometer trip. Mm-hmm. And I had a big truck and loaded the 300 colonies of bees into the truck, mm-hmm. and drove to Florida, put them in citrus groves, oranges and grapefruit. And that way the bees could produce some honey during the winter. Mm-hmm. And then from there, the bees went back to Pennsylvania for one summer, back to Florida. So I'm single, I'm living in the truck, I'm renting a place to stay. I ended up then in Wisconsin, also keeping bees. Now, I should back up just a little bit because I was very adventurous and I was quite young, but I wasn't totally cold and entering all of these adventures totally by myself. So I back up by telling you that I had a very large family. There were 10 children, including me. So I had 9 brothers and sisters, and 2 of them were already much older and had left the house, and they were keeping bees.
Mm-hmm.
So one was a beekeeper in Florida,
All right.
and another one was a beekeeper in a place called Wisconsin, which is north of Chicago.
All right.
So, and it's about 2,500 kilometers from Florida to Wisconsin, and that's a much better place for producing honey. So I started taking my bees from Florida to Wisconsin, where I could had the assistance of one of my brothers, and they would help me to figure where I'm going to put my bees. And, you know, I ran this all myself, but I had family help just for advice more than anything, mostly for advice, which I needed. I was pretty young.
So that was in the 70s?
Yes,
All
thank
right.
you. That's important too, because things changed so much.
Yeah.
In the 70s, the roads weren't great. We had a lot of small roads to drive these long distances. It would sometimes take 2 days, 3 days to drive. Today, you might do it 1.5 days. If you had 2 drivers, you could go much quicker.
Yeah.
The roads have improved, but in Florida, maybe my fourth winter or so in Florida, so I would have been 22 years old, maybe 23, something like that. I met a person from Canada, Western Canada.
All right.
Now, this was 5,000 kilometers from Florida.
Yeah. Oh my God! It's like going back and forth from the northernmost point in Italy to the southernmost point in Italy, like multiple times, like going up and down, up and down. It's like
it probably felt like that too.
Yeah.
It was. These are long. I spent a lot of my time driving, so you know, to relocate bees, moving hives of bees. We can talk about that a bit, but first, I just give you an overview of how I got to where I am today. So I visited the person in Canada, in Western Canada. This would be, I don't know if you would be familiar with maybe Montana in the United States, and Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, Yellowstone National Park.
That's in the western side of the U.S. Yep.
Exactly. So the western side of the United States, and I was north of the United States in Canada, Western Canada. The city that's the biggest nearby is Calgary, and we had the Olympics a few years ago now. But Calgary is a big city in Western Canada. So I ended up being offered this small honey farm in Canada for no money down. And like I didn't have to pay anything up front. The person knew me, he knew my family, and he wanted to sell these bees and a small house and a very small shop for processing honey. And again, there were about 300 hives of bees there. So I had 300 hives of bees, 300 colonies of bees in the United States, and also 300 in Canada at the start. I increased my numbers rapidly, but the American bees were not allowed to enter Canada in the bee boxes, the frames, the supers. There are legal restrictions for importing equipment.
And why was that?
Because equipment can carry diseases.
All right.
So if the Canadian beekeepers decided to create the law that said you could bring honeybees in small cages. We call them packages. So a package of bees is a cage, with screen on it that has a queen, one queen, and about 5,000 bees.
Yeah.
And from that, you can start a colony to go for the entire summer. So I started producing packages in Florida and driving them to Saskatchewan, Canada, and putting those bees from the cage into equipment that I bought in Canada. So then I had two separate businesses, one in Florida and one in Canada.
Right.
And after a couple of years, I decided that I didn't want to be a truck driver all the time. So I sold what I had in Florida and stayed in Canada. And in Canada, then I would winter my bees, which was difficult because the winters are really long and can be quite cold. But the bees would winter in Canada, and I could use them to produce the big honey crops. So I produced honey in Saskatchewan for about 10 years.
All right.
And my first years were really, really good. We had good rains and good conditions, and the bees did extremely well. So when I say extremely well, I mean it wasn't unusual for me to produce 100 to 150 kilograms of honey from each hive in the year.
That's a lot.
So that was profitable. I did well. I made these very big crops, and the honey is water white, very, very pretty honey, low moisture because the climate is dry, and it's from clovers and alfalfa.
Right.
So it was a very, very nice quality honey. I did that successfully for about 6-7 years, and then we had because we were in a dry area, which does very well when there's enough rain. But when it's dry, there's no rain. And I went 14 months with no rain at all. And all the forage plants, they survived, but they didn't produce nectar. So I had a year where I used to make 120 kilograms from each hive. I made 10 kilograms. And after the second year was very similar, a little better, but still very poor. I thought it's time for me to do something different. And at that time, I was 33 years old. I had been keeping bees for 10 years in Saskatchewan and for about 15 years in my lifetime. And I thought, as a commercial beekeeper for 15 years, 10 years in Canada, and I thought I'd never went to university. And I thought, it's time, by then, I had a young family, 2 children, and I thought, well, I still need to do something, because if it stays dry for 2 or 3 more years and there's no honey, then all my savings would be gone from keeping bees in the successful years. I had made some money, but then I was starting to borrow money from the business, and I thought, I don't want to do this. So I sold the business and to some people from California.
All right.
So they wanted to have an operation, a honey farm inside Canada. So they purchased my honey farm in Canada. I sold. I had about 1,000 colonies at that time in Canada, and you remember I had already decided to stay in Canada, so I had sold my American bees. So then I had 1,000 colonies in Canada, and I sold 700 colonies, and I kept 300, and I located them in another part of Saskatchewan, actually a long ways north. It was at the end of agriculture. If you went any further, you were in forest and bears and beavers and
Yeah.
nothing for the bees to eat. So I moved all the way up there with 300 colonies of bees, and part of the reason for that was it was close to the university that I wanted to go to.
What did you study?
Well, I was a beekeeper for 15 years. So naturally, I went into geophysics.
That's perfectly natural.
I know it sounds pretty strange, but I was always good at math, and I like the idea of studying the Earth. Why do we have a magnetic field on the Earth? Why do we have earthquakes where they occur and volcanoes in other locations? And how can we figure out what's beneath the surface of the Earth by looking from the top? So, using magnetism, using seismic waves that go into the ground from vibrations, it was all interesting to me. And I spent 4 years and earned my geophysics degree, did extremely well at it. So I had job offers, which took me to Calgary.
All right.
So the jobs were in Calgary for people who were good at geophysics. So in Calgary, I didn't bring my 300 colonies of bees. I left them behind in Saskatchewan with a friend, and I moved to Calgary, big city, million people, lots of changes. And here then I kept hobby bees.
All right.
And I kept hobby bees then for quite a few years. And at the same time, I started becoming interested in knowing more. Like, you can be a geophysicist and learn what you need to learn and do a good job in a business, or which I owned. I had a small business which used geophysical detections, and I decided that I had enough of that. And it was about 15 years of being a geophysicist. And I thought it's time for another change. So I started taking classes at the local university, and I thought this time I'm going to study bees.
All right.
So I was taking ecology courses. So all the while I still had hobby bees, like a few hives of bees, about 15 colonies, to keep myself busy, and weekends doing something different out of the office, because I had worked in the office. But I decided then, why don't I go to university again and work on a master's? So that's where I am today. I'm working on a master's in bee ecology. And my big question that I needed to answer for myself was, all of my years of keeping honeybees all over North America, how much impact or problem did I create for the native bees? Because the honeybee that we use in North America, you use the same bee in Europe. That honeybee in North America is not native. It is native in Italy. It's native all over Europe and North Africa and the Middle East, but it's not native in North America. So because it's not native, you would expect there to be some impact, some problem with the competition between our honeybees that we place in very large numbers in areas where bumblebees and wild bees and other bees used to be the only pollinator. Now suddenly there are not just a few, but millions of competing bees within the same area. So that's what I'm studying now. And most of what I'm learning, I'm finding really interesting, and not necessarily a big problem for the native bees, as long as the numbers of honeybees aren't too high. If you have a location where a beekeeper, a honey beekeeper, might put 1,000 colonies of bees. Now, I think you have that, like in Turkey, I know that they keep locations like that. I don't know if it's common in Italy, to have a lot of bees in one spot. In parts of the
maybe not 1,000, but
100,
400.
Yeah.
300 or 400 is a lot already too.
Yeah.
And when I visited Hungary, I was at an apiary with 200 colonies of bees, which was for the acacia.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you have some familiarity with this, and you could imagine that if there was a location with a lot of bees, then certainly there's going to be some impact on the wild bees. It just has to be because there's so many. And then if you reduce that number, you'll probably reach some point where the human observer no longer sees an impact, but we still don't know whether the bees, the wild bees themselves, have an impact from so many colonies of honeybees in one spot. So I'm trying to figure out what that number is so that people could continue to keep honeybees for fun, for honey, for their hobby, but at the same time limit the number so it's not a big impact on the environment. So that's where I am today. That's what I'm working on now.
We are also hearing this kind of thing on especially the Instagram community here in Italy. The Instagram community of young people trying to teach science and trying to bring awareness about this thing, because there is this whole Save the Bees movement that we are going to talk about, and everybody thinks that because there is this kind of miscommunication here, because the word bee in Italian, which is ape, usually it's not like in English where bees or the word bee means the whole group of bees, honeybees and solitary bees and everything, In Italian, when you say bee, when you say ape, everyone, including ourselves, we think of the honeybee. So with when you say save the bees in Italian, everyone thinks of save the honeybees and not save everything. So there is this kind of miscommunication here due to linguistic stuff, and everyone thinks that we have to save the honeybee. And they have no idea that there is a whole universe of bees, of solitary bees, of eusocial bees, and those are the one in most danger. Honeybees is, protected by us human. We handle, we keep bees. We try to keep the numbers high and everything. We take care of them. Honeybees, not the other bees. And that's where there is a lack of scientific papers about what is the impact of our agricultural system, our pesticide treatments and everything. What is the impact on solitary bees, on the other bees? Because there is not honeybees are kept by us humans. There is a whole universe behind it, and everyone wants to study honeybees because it's easier, and it's not that easy to study all the other bees. So that's where there's this whole confusion and about it, and there is people that are trying to bring awareness to this kind of problem.
Yes, I really appreciate hearing that, because I didn't realize that this would be such a big communication mistake or problem. Luca, you were about to say something.
I was saying that we talked about this with a beekeeper from Iceland. They import bees from.
They import bees from Sweden. And they started to have honeybees in the 1960s, because obviously honeybee is not native of Iceland. And they're importing bees from Sweden, to do beekeeping, to keep the bees. And but again, as you said, what is the impact that our honeybee is having on the native Icelandic bees? And that is an important question. That's something that's happening right now in Iceland. And we were talking with this Icelandic
maybe it's interesting to compare that because in Iceland they have like 100 colonies. How many?
There should be like 150 colonies maximum in the whole island of Iceland.
Because
so it's not that much.
It's very difficult and costly to keep bees there. And
because of the long winters, as you said, in Canada, same thing.
So maybe it's interesting to compare Iceland beekeeping to American beekeeping because it's to the extreme in America. They have a lot of colonies and in Iceland they have
they have very little, and it's happening right now. It's something that it's easier to monitor, I believe, because it's actually happening, this whole interaction between native pollinators and honeybees. I don't know.
Yeah, no, you have a very good point. I was in Iceland myself too, and what I noticed was the number of bumblebees that they have in Iceland. So they have very few bees in Iceland. I think there are only 5 species of bumblebees in the whole country, and 2 of those species were imported, also non-native, and 3 of the species we're not certain that they are native because they probably came with the Vikings from Norway, on a boat with horses and hay, just by accident.
Yeah.
So probably 1,500 years ago, probably there were no bumblebees at all in Iceland. So both the bumblebees, which we're now worried about because they were there first, and then the honeybees, it makes it an interesting and difficult thing to decide. But I think one thing to consider is in a place like Iceland, the honeybee cannot become established without human intervention. So it's easy to reverse if somebody decides, no, this is a very serious problem, we really shouldn't have them here, then you just stop keeping bees and they will die. They will not survive the winter without people wintering them. It's even true here in Western Canada. Feral colonies of bees, colonies that have escaped and tried to go wild. Well, you've probably already know that some research by Dr. Tom Seeley in the state of New York, he found that only about 25% of colonies survive through the next year. So for a colony to swarm, now I'm talking about swarms. So when a colony swarms, it already has a disadvantage because it's May or June, and they have to build up and survive the winter and then the next year. So they often cannot find a good wintering location, and so on. So the fact is, even in Western Canada, they won't stay. If beekeepers quit keeping bees, the honeybees would disappear. We also have a really interesting thing here in Western Canada that makes us quite unique, is that not only are the honeybees imported, but the food that the honeybees eat is also almost entirely imported. Right. For instance, in the spring we have what we call dandelion. It's a small yellow flower that grows in,
it's very important for our bees to dandelion. So we know that very well. We make not we, but here in Italy, dandelion honey. It's quite important.
Yeah, we have monofloral honey of dandelion.
Yeah, okay, so you have a lot of it there. Enough we probably have enough to make a crop, but beekeepers don't take it from the bees because they've just come through a long winter and they usually need the food to build up their hive. And after the dandelion, we usually have a short period where there's nothing blooming, so for maybe 3 weeks or so. So the dandelion is not native to North America. After the dandelion is finished, there's a period without much honey coming in for 2 or 3 weeks, and then the clovers start. So when I say clover, I also include what we call sweet clover, which is the really tall medico.
All right.
Do you know which one I'm talking about? It can be yellow or white.
Erba medica.
I'm not sure.
It's a biennial, so it takes 1 year to grow, second year. So sweet clover.
You're looking that up?
Mm-hmm.
It's not working.
Aspetta.
Okay.
Melilotto.
Okay, Melilotto comune. Yeah, that's one. That one.
Yeah, thank you. I should know that, and
right.
I feel silly that I don't know. But that's one of our best honey crops here.
All right.
And it blooms when the bees colony is strong and the weather is warm, and they can make 100 kilograms of honey from sweet clover and also from alfalfa.
All right.
Which is lucerne. Is that right?
Alfalfa, isn't it? Is alfalfa herba medica?
Sure.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, we know that.
Yeah.
We also
Okay.
have that kind of flowers here in Italy as well.
All right, but they're not native here. So the sweet clover came from Europe. The alfalfa probably came from North Africa originally and was brought by the Spanish into the western part, like Mexico and California. So it moved north, and the sweet clover was a weed accidentally imported by the English and Germans who settled in the United States and Canada, and then it spread out here. And it's only been about 100 years since alfalfa, sweet clover, dandelion, all of that is new to Western Canada, and the bees are too. So it's relatively new country for the bees. And one final crop that we produce a lot of honey from is what we in Canada call canola. And that's a rape seed or rape oil seed plant. And it's called canola because it's a Canadian oil, low acid. Because, so it was designed inside of Canada with, not with genetic manipulation, but with a lot of breeding to get rid of the acids that are harmful. And now there are, I think just in the province of Alberta, there are about 10 million hectares of canola. So between, now that's also not native. They brought the original rapeseed came from Poland and was inbred or basically the species was improved for human consumption. So we have all those crops that are not native to Western Canada, and the bees are not native. So we have a little different situation then. For instance, here inside the city of Calgary, 1 million people, and we have, the city is about 30 kilometers wide and about 50 kilometers north and south. And the beekeepers, even near the center of the city, are finding their bees are flying out of the city to reach these imported plants. And that leaves the native plants and the native bees a little better with less competition. That's one of the big findings I had with my research work. Now, that's not going to be true in Italy or in Germany or in France. It's going to be different because you do have flowers that are native, and the honeybees are native. So you're going to have lots of species competing against those same plants.
Yeah.
But I think the answer again is watching the numbers and trying to. It looks to me like as long as we can stay below about 6 honeybee colonies per square kilometer, then we probably are not having a serious impact or a noticeable impact on the success of the wild bees. but there are places where those numbers are higher than that.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I've never heard that kind of number before. Have you? No, that's the first time that we hear, more or less how many hives we could keep in order not to compete with the local pollinators. That's great.
And that is of course a generalized number, because there could be different seasons early in the spring when only 2 or 3 plants are blooming, and you have more competition. Then it might be that's too many. But during most of the year, I think if we can stay in that range of anywhere from 3 to 6 colonies per square kilometer, then it's probably not seriously detrimental. But that will change depending on what location you're in.
Yeah, I mean, Italy is so much smaller than Canada. I've been doing some research on American beekeeping, and I was trying to understand how many times Italy can fit inside the US, and I've counted like 12 times. And there is still some land that's not covered by the Italian peninsula, so it's like so much bigger than we are. But the ironic thing is that I believe acacia is imported from the US. It's not native from Italy.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
And the best, not the best honey, but the best-selling honey in Italy is acacia honey. So it's like the same situation that you were describing before, opposite, vice versa here in Italy.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. It's one of the best honeys in the world. When I was a young person in Pennsylvania, we had acacia trees. And there was one place where I would take about 50 or 60 honeybee colonies, put them on the back of the truck. I could carry 20 at a time in those days. And this is when I was 17, 18 years old. And I would drive about 50, 60 kilometers south of our farm. And there was like a small valley that was covered in acacia trees. Now, those were wild, native, natural trees.
Yeah. Oh my
God. I was shocked when I got to... My wife is from Hungary.
All right.
So I was shocked when I went to Hungary and saw that the acacia covers thousands of square kilometers, and I think I understand that 100 million pounds of acacia honey is produced every year in Hungary, Romania, Czech Republic, that area. And I didn't realize that Italy also has a lot. But yes, those trees, at one time, just a few years ago, there was, about this, there was a small effort to suggest that you take away all the acacia trees because they're not native. And yes, and actually the research I read came from Germany. And of course, Germany has fewer acacia trees, so this would impact Italy and the Slav countries, Hungary, more. But anyway, somebody argued against that and said, well, if you do want to take away the acacia trees, which make honey for us, then I think you should take away the potatoes, which come from South America, the tomatoes, which come from South America, and you could name a lot of different things from different parts of the world. Yeah.
Oh my God. And when, during the last few years, we've had some problems, during the acacia flowering season, which is during the first 2 weeks of May. 1 year because of drought, like this year. Last year, it was because it was raining too much. So since it's the best-selling honey in Italy, we import part of it from Eastern Europe, especially Ukraine, and I believe Hungary too, and Romania as well. So, I mean, it's not native, but it's
but it's such a nice honey. Of all the honey in the world, the acacia has I think it's number one in the amount of the sugar balance between the glucose, the fructose, sucrose, sugars in the honey naturally occur there. That it doesn't crystallize, it doesn't turn hard, it stays just, and it's so white and clear and mild that it's just it's a beautiful honey. So I could see that it would be much in demand. But meanwhile, back in the United States, they produce almost no acacia honey. It's a very rare, because it's not as extensive. It didn't grow. Isn't that odd that you could take a plant like the acacia tree and take it to Europe and it colonizes, it covers, you know.
It's very weird. And what is considered the best-selling honey, the best honey in the US and Canada? What does the customer prefer?
They have learned to prefer clover.
All right.
Because clover is mild. It's not as sweet as the acacia honey, but it's as white, maybe even whiter sometimes. So it does not give a big flavor to, if you're cooking with it or making bread, you don't taste an odd flavor. You just, it works like a sugar. And people have learned that, and it's very common. That's one of the biggest produced honeys here, is the clover honeys.
And
so that's our big
clover
seller.
honey as well, if I remember correctly.
I'm sorry, I just missed what you said.
It's all right. The train was passing by, so this is why.
Oh, that's what happened.
Yeah, trains going back and forth here. I was asking, what did you produce clover honey as well, if I remember correctly, or were you producing also other types of honey?
No, it was also the clover honey, but other types of honey, orange or citrus honey,
of course,
in Florida. Quite a bit of that I produced, and as a specialty honey, I did produce a small amount of acacia honey when I was very young, and also buckwheat honey, which is a seed that makes a black honey, very strong flavored. I liked it. It was interesting.
And you were going to Florida not just to make honey, but also to pollinate. Is that correct?
Well, it's interesting. Pollination in the citrus in Florida is a little different, because there are a lot of beekeepers in the northern United States who want to take their bees to Florida because of the climate for the winter.
Yeah.
And the citrus blooms in late February, in March, sometimes into early April. So the bees then arrive in Florida in November. Then they have November, December, January, where they are somewhat dormant, and you begin to feed them to build up their population, and then you can produce the honey. So the citrus grove owners, the orchard owners, they can say to the beekeeper, well, I won't pay you anything for pollination, but I'll give you this nice location. You can put as many bees as you want there. Yeah. So that's how it worked with the citrus. There are parts of Florida where they grow some other types of crops, like watermelons. Those are the big green melons. So those, they will pay a beekeeper to bring the bees in for pollination. I never was paid for pollinating in Florida. I did receive a small amount of money for pollinating apple trees. So the apples were something that they bloom in April in the north, and in April in the north it's still pretty cold. And there aren't too many wild bees, and there aren't too many honeybees in the places where these big, we're talking maybe 2 or 3 square kilometers of apple trees. And so when you have that amount of apple trees in one location and not enough bees, then they happily pay you. They never paid me a lot of money for doing that because it was, for me, it was money that helped me move my bees to pay for the freight of taking the bees from the south to the north. Yeah. So I went into apple orchards in the Appalachian Mountains, and then I would place maybe 6 colonies of bees, and then drive a little distance, another 6, and drive a little distance, and that would take all day to unload 300 or 400 colonies of bees. Now, this is back in the 70s, early 80s. These days, forklifts and pallets and big semi trucks and you know, it's all done maybe in 2 hours. Yeah. They can unload the whole thing, and it's and the pollination that we usually think about today is not that much of the crops that I'm talking about in the East. The crops in the East were cucumbers, melons, some cherry trees, apple trees, and blueberries, cranberries, those small berries. But in the West, that's where the big pollination. I never participated in that. Why I can't really. I don't know anything about taking bees into California for almonds. So that would be something totally different.
Yeah, I'm researching this. You know, California almonds and you know, bees. The whole relationship between the two things. I've been researching this for like 6 months now. I've been reading everything I'm finding on the internet, because it's something, you know, American beekeeping, the whole thing, it's so much different from what we are used to here. Not just in Italy, but the whole Europe. We keep you know, honeybees to make honey. We don't keep bees to pollinate, and this is something that, you know, is the other way around in the U.S. Most of the American beekeepers, they keep bees to pollinate because that's where the money is right now. Not that much in honey. You can also make money with honey, but it's, from what I'm understanding, you have to put the two things together, because you know, honey prices are going down, and this is something that's happening here in Europe as well. So you have to compensate with something else, and we haven't figured that out here in Europe. So we're still struggling, you know, with, you know, to make ends meet just with honey, or, you know, breeding queens and royal jelly and things like that. But in the US, you have, I mean, you have figured things out more or less, and you are trying to compensate with, you know, pollination services. But at what I'm asking myself, and I'm still reading about this, what is the cost on the honeybees and the beekeepers as well? Because what I'm reading is like the commodification of honeybee, something that I'm really interested in, and the bee, it's not the, I mean, we don't keep bees to produce honey anymore, so the bee has become a commodity itself, because they are paying you to get your bees. They don't care about your honey. They want your bees to pollinate, and it opens to the whole, you know, industrialization of beekeeping. That's something that's kind of scary from, you know, our point of view. You know, loading 400 bees in one truck and then going for like 4,000 kilometers. It's something that, like, wow, I mean, how can you do that? And what is the cost on the honeybee?
Yes, you have excellent points. And unfortunately, the differences, you've already observed, those differences are huge between Europe and North America. So, in the United States, the beekeepers have become dependent on almond pollination, and at least half of all the colonies, probably more like 2/3 now, go into almond pollination because the beekeepers need that money to make their income. And most of those beekeepers carry their colonies after the almonds, which are usually blooming in January and February. They still have time to move the colonies into the western United States, northwestern United States, states like North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and so on, where they can produce a nice honey crop. So there's a small state, well, not small, not tiny, but there's a state that's not one of the biggest, but it's just south of Canada, south of Saskatchewan. It's called North Dakota. And if you look at the records from maybe 50 years ago, North Dakota produced a lot of honey. It's one of the best honey producing states in the United States. And it only had, I think, 40,000 colonies of bees, because the beekeepers in those days rarely moved the bees out of the state. They would winter them there, they would keep them there. Today, it has more bees than any other state in the summertime. So about 400,000 colonies of bees are in North Dakota in the summer, and it's not that big of a state. In Canada, we're in a little different situation where we are not allowed by the government regulations to take our honeybee colonies to California for almond pollination.
All right.
And that's probably actually a blessing, because if we did, we would do it, and we would get that extra $200 or $300 from every colony. But as you said already, at what cost? And as long as we can winter our bees here, which we've learned how to do, and produce these big honey crops, then it's less difficult for the bees and for the beekeeper too. You don't have to be traveling on the roads and living in two different places so much of the year. I think your question then, what will you do in Europe in order to be successful when you don't have these huge pollination contracts? Well, you can look at Canada as an example. Western Canada produces a lot of honey, and our beekeepers rely almost 100% on honey production. But provinces of Canada, parts of Canada in the east also have successful beekeepers who are keeping only, maybe producing 1/3 the honey crop, and keeping fewer bees than the beekeepers in the western part of Canada. And they're still succeeding as family businesses. They can have 500-600 colonies, 2,000 colonies. In Western Canada, we have beekeepers with 20,000 colonies of bees.
Yeah. So you're talking about reducing the numbers of hives, kept. That's more or less your.
And then marketing. The marketing system is different in the eastern part of Canada than in the west. In the west, 95% of all the honey is put into steel drums, barrels that weigh 700 pounds and get sent out by the semi-load, 40,000 pounds at a time. And in the east, probably only 30% of the honey is sold that way. The other 70% of the honey in the east is sold in stores, in markets, farmers markets. And the difference in price is what makes it viable as a business. So thinking of Europe again, you have the beautiful honey. You can produce good honey crops. And I think some of the advantages you have are that you have so far been able to keep the amounts of pesticides in the honey very low, or non-existent. I think that there has been a movement to reduce neonicotinoids and other types of chemicals, and we don't have that here because we are doing monoculture, big industrial scale. I have mixed feelings about both. I can understand agribusiness. I understand, we're trying to feed 7 billion people in the world, and we probably can't do it all with 2 hives of bees and an apple tree in the backyard. You know, we have to have, until we get population under control, until, you know, we are more efficient with saving energy and growing foods, then this is where we are today. But we can try to push things more towards the European model, where you still have bigger biodiversity than we have in North America. We tend to replace entire prairies with grain, wheat, canola by the millions of hectares. Yeah. And I know when I drove through central France a number of years ago, I was so surprised because that was the only part of Europe that I personally saw that looked a lot like Western Canada, because we're rolling prairies that went on for kilometer after kilometer, all the same kind of crop. Yeah. And that's rare in Europe. I've also spent a good bit of time in Eastern Europe, and there I see the smaller farms and the mixed variety of crops. And when you have that, then you need fewer pesticides, and you can become more intense in growing 30 hectares of a crop and doing it really well than growing 300 hectares of that same crop and doing it, you know, arguably more efficiently, but not as efficient use of the land itself. Just more efficient use of your time and your production. So,
you know, beekeeping in Western Canada sounds a lot like beekeeping in Italy. And with this, I mean that most of the honey that it's produced here, it's sold in barrels, so you get a lower price. Trying to sell it in farmers market, on your Sundays, going from one city to another, that's a huge waste of time for a beekeeper. A beekeeper loves, traveling around, going to keep the bees and everything, but don't talk to that beekeeper about marketing, about selling go to a farmer's market, because they have to meet people, they have to try to sell their honey, they have to try to explain why their honey is better than the honey sold, in the next, shop. So that's something that usually the Italian beekeepers cannot do that very well. But we were talking about this with Luca and with other people on the internet, and that is maybe a solution to the problem of, honey prices going low and not getting enough money out of your business. Maybe this could be a solution, going smaller and trying to make less honey and sell it for a higher price directly to the customer.
Exactly. And people will, it can be very frustrating at first, because you have to build your market.
Yeah.
And if you have a mix where you sell as much as possible in the small containers without completely destroying your life by being in markets all the time and on the road to sell it and so on. If you can do the small amounts, and at the same time sell some bulk quantity of honey, and then slowly build up in your local sales. I've seen that work with a number of beekeepers, that they create a nice brand name and have a market, and people begin to respect the product. But you have a really good product where you are. You can produce nice varieties of honey, and you can also produce honey that doesn't have as much chemical in it as we have in North America. So that's good. As you were talking, it reminded me of a movie that I watched a few years ago, and you will know the movie because it was in Italian. It was The Wonders in English. It was about a beekeeping family in Italy. I don't know what the Italian. Oh no, the Italian name is Le Meraviglie.
Ah, Le Meraviglie. Okay, I haven't seen
Oh,
it.
thank you. See, I can't
That's all
speak
right.
Italian.
I don't think we have seen it.
No.
We will
Oh, you
soon.
should.
We will soon.
It's a strange movie. I'm not recommending it, but I found it very interesting. It was very interesting. But as you were talking about, the varieties of honey and the small beekeepers, and that reminded me of that movie. But it is a strange movie. I don't recommend it for your viewers unless they are ready to watch something really different. Yeah. Another movie that I could recommend that's an American movie that I really love is called Yuli's Gold. Stars Peter Fonda.
Yeah, we have found it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
If you have a chance, that tells you so much about American commercial beekeeping.
All right, perfect.
It's an amazing movie. It's a drama. It's about a son of the beekeeper who is in prison for being involved in robbery, and then some bad guys come along. But all the time, the old man, played by Peter Fonda, is trying to keep a honey farm going. And it's so interesting. I think you will really enjoy that one.
We will put that in our to-watch list soon because we have never heard of that.
Enjoy that. Yeah.
Anyway, I was thinking when you were talking about monocultures in Canada and the US, I've tried to do a comparison between Italy and the US. And the biggest monoculture here is obviously, vineyards to produce wine, obviously. And in the whole Italy, we have around 500,000 kilometers square, that's occupied by vineyards, but they are distributed throughout the whole peninsula. Islands comprehended, both Sicily and Sardinia. And when I was trying to find out, the numbers for the almonds I think I'm wrong. It's like 700,000 kilometers squares of vineyards in Italy and 500,000 kilometers squares of almonds in California. But they're all concentrated in an area which is smaller than Italy. I mean, the Central Valley of California is smaller than Italy. So like it's completely concentrated in a small area, whilst in Italy, wine is produced throughout the whole country. So it's something that we are not used to that. We don't actually can understand that because we are not used to that. And that's something that's like scary. All the, 80% of the almond production, the world production is produced in the US. And that's a lot,
For the whole world, yes.
And I'm questioning myself, is almond milk vegan? And the question comes from the fact that obviously it's vegan because it's not made with an animal. It's not like cow milk, you have to milk the cow. But is almond milk vegan because of the effort of all the bees that go there and they try to fight their way out of California to go back to a healthier place? And that's something that I'm asking myself, like, is almond milk vegan? And I'm ready to say that it's not because of all the pollination services done there.
But if we really look a little bit deeply into vegan, it would be difficult to find any food that doesn't involve some animal activity in some way or another. Whether it is we plow up a field to plant something, we kill worms that are in the soil, that are creating the soil, insects in the soil. I think I'm not vegan. I have been vegetarian, not currently, not today, but I have in the past. And I found it to be very healthful. And also, I have a lot of guilt whenever I eat animal meat. It just feels wrong. And I'm trying to eat less and less just because ethically I feel it's wrong. But when you talk about almond milk, it's probably okay to claim it to be vegan in the sense that it comes from a tree and a nut, a plant on a tree. But we have to wonder whether it's ethical.
Yeah.
So ethical could be very different from vegan.
Yeah.
And one of the big problems we now face in North America is our Western drought, lack of water, and almond trees devour more water than probably any other plant-based food that we have. They grow best in the very hot, dry climate in that Central Valley of California, but then they require so much water that goes into the roots of the tree, and 500,000 square kilometers of these trees, millions of trees, drink up the water and produce a couple thousand pounds of almond nuts, and in the meanwhile take tens of thousands of liters of water to do that. It's just that's a problem. And then on top of that, the idea of it being so monoculture that nothing else really lives close by in the almond orchards. So when you go into an almond grove with honeybees, they can only work on the almonds and nothing else. So it's a problem. But I'm not the almond expert. I like you. I just research it and I talk to some people, but still, it's not something that I'm glad I never had to be involved in that. It sounds pretty rough, pretty difficult for the bees and for the environment.
And
so.
Let's jump. Well, thank you very much for your point of view, because it's always helpful. And let's try to go back a little bit, and because we have never talked about your book, we will show it on screen because we have it. We had it on our Amazon wish list for a few months, and then a friend of Luca gifted it to us. And when we started reading it, it was like, I mean, your whole life is here. Life as a beekeeper, obviously, and but what we are interested in is the title. What is bad beekeeping? What is
okay? So that of course is a playful title, but there's a lot of truth in it. For a long time, I was thinking I should write a book about my experiences because it's unusual what I did. So this book is a memoir, and I don't, it's probably the same in Italy as it is in North America, where beekeepers tend to brag quite a lot about how well they do, the size of their crop, how many colonies they have. They're pretty easy flowing with the numbers from, I always make this much, I do this well, I don't have any swarms, everything is good in my apiary, I've never had disease. And I thought, everybody brags about being a good beekeeper. And I always felt I never was that good of a beekeeper. I was sometimes lucky. I made some mistakes. And at first I was thinking of making a beekeeping manual which would list all kinds of mistakes a person could make. And as I started to write, it occurred to me that it would be more fun and interesting to write a story of personal experience. So the word bad beekeeping actually came into the book because I met with some good beekeepers in Saskatchewan who were talking about their huge honey crops. And they said, well, the United States they only make like 30 kilos on average, and up here we make like 60, 70 kilos on average across the whole country, and in Saskatchewan it was usually 100 kilos. And why is that? And I told this person, I said, well, you know, climate has a lot to do with it. We have in Canada, Western Canada, we have a short season, lots of flowers blooming, the bees are strong, and they make a lot of honey all at one time. And in Florida, for example, or Pennsylvania, where I was from, the crops bloom over months and months, and there's a little bit of honey, and I said, so we have the climate, we have a lot of beekeepers try to raise queens for sale, so they're not selling honey. So that makes the average go down overall. And I tell him all these things, and he looks at me and he says, no, I think it's bad beekeeping. I think the Americans just have bad beekeeping. And I thought, no, you weren't listening. And then I thought that would be a cute title for the book, Bad Beekeeping. So this book was hard for you to get. I'm rewriting it because a number of things have changed, and I also want to put a little, like a following chapter, which talks more about bee ecology than about the beekeeping, because I learned a lot in the last few years about the impact of honeybees and how to keep honeybees better and so on. So there's a company, you may know, Northern Bee Books in England.
Yeah, we know
they
them.
Okay, so they have been asking me for several months to please let them publish this book that you're holding, the Bad Beekeeping book. And they said, please publish, please let us publish it. And I said, well, I will let you publish it, and I would be happy to, because it's a good company. They do really good work.
Yeah.
But I said, let me rewrite the book a bit. And I have a number of things I want to change just slightly in the book. I wrote the book about 15 years ago, and it reflects a time that's even older than that. And we have become more culturally sensitive also over the years. And throughout the book, my best friend in Canada was what is known as a native or indigenous person. He was Cree is the name of the group of people, and we used to always call these people Indians.
Yeah.
And I never liked that word, but it was the word everybody used.
Yeah.
And now we know better. And when I rewrite the book, I would take the word Indian out of it, because to me it's disrespectful.
Yeah.
It's a word that was put on a group of people who, one gentleman from Italy, by the way, Christopher Columbus, lands in North America, and he thinks he's in India.
Yeah.
So the people are Indians. And that name stuck, and it's so unfair, and it's wrong. But it was the only word I knew at the time.
Yeah.
So I would change that. I would also change a few other things, like put more detail in some of the things, and leave some detail out. Almost everybody who reads the book, they say, you know, it's interesting to know how to raise queen bees, but it got boring after 4 pages of just you. And I thought, well, I can fix that. So I'm rewriting it in the little bit of spare time that I give myself. I have
make
to
sure
try
to buy the new version as well, because, I mean, funny enough, this book is printed in Italy.
Was it printed in Italy?
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yes. I didn't know that.
Maybe,
That's
I don't know
great.
if it's like an Amazon print or something, but
Probably.
we noticed. Yeah. It's printed here, so I mean, it's
that's
funny.
Great. That's great.
But so this is what bad beekeeping is, and when I stumbled upon your bee washing article that you wrote for the American Bee Journal.
Yes.
It was like a coincidence, because I'm getting Google alerts about new papers that get published every day, and I almost missed your article because I don't know, it had a weird title on my Google alerts page, and I was like, I don't think this is about beekeeping. But a few days later, I went back and I read that, and I read your name, and I was like, Luca, you have to read this because it's written by Ron, and it's about bee washing, and it's the Bee World Day, no, World Bee Day. Yeah. That's it. The World Bee Day was coming up, and we were thinking of writing something, about the impact of honeybees on local species and things like that. And we have to read this because personally, I have never heard about the bee washing word before. He did, but I didn't. You already knew the word. And it was a very interesting read. And so what is bee washing? Directly from the guy who wrote the article.
Okay, thank you. So, yes, you may have heard of something called greenwashing.
Yes.
So greenwashing is the activity of doing something to make your company look more environmentally responsible. So although it's helpful to take a landfill and cover it with sod and grass and let the trees and grass grow on top of an old landfill that was full of garbage and junk, it would be better to clean up the garbage and junk and take the chemicals out of it and recycle as much as possible. But when you just cover it with a layer of green, we call that greenwashing. Yeah. And a lot of companies do small activities, like they'll put in a very pretty garden in front of their main office, and the company is digging holes in the Dolomite Mountains in the Alps to and making a real mess and not cleaning up the way they should, but they have a very pretty office with flowers, and that would be greenwashing. So the idea of bee washing came to a couple of researchers in Toronto, Canada, who were trying to describe the activity of using bees as a way of masking or hiding some of the environmental problems that others are creating. And in fact, here in Canada, we have a company which is keeping honeybee hives in about 20 different cities in North America. These include Montreal, where they started, and then also in Ottawa, the capital of Canada, Toronto, Calgary, where I am, Vancouver, and then down in the United States, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York City, and other cities. Yeah. They have placed honeybees on rooftops of factories and offices, and then it gives the opportunity for the company that hires them to be able to say, look, we're doing all we can for the environment. Yeah. And so we call that bee washing, because bees are save the bees, very popular idea. And people are concerned, they're worried. And that's very good that the average person suddenly is aware that there could be problems with bees. And those problems, though, are not going to be solved by putting honeybee hives, particularly here in North America, where honeybees aren't native, putting those honeybee hives on top of buildings. Now, the company itself, I have to be fair to them, they have been trying very hard in recent years to basically educate people and spread the idea that there are more than one kind of bee, that honeybees are nice, but we could also be helping the wild bees and the native bees. They've learned, and I'm hoping that others also take that lesson and try to do this, because it is possible that having too many honeybees in an area can be harmful. So while you think that you've paid somebody to help the environment by putting honeybees on your rooftop, it may be that you're actually hurting the environment more than you're helping it. So that's bee washing, and it is something that we're trying to educate people away from. Here in North America, we have a number of motivations for urban beekeeping, and people become urban hobby beekeepers sometimes because they want to produce good food for their families themselves. And sometimes they do it because they think that it's a healthy activity physically, and even the bee stings can be healthy. So they look at that. And finally, they begin to get into bees because they think that the bees are going to help the environment. So we're trying to make sure people know that the environment is not going to be helped by your bees. But if you want to keep bees, then a few colonies in your backyard is probably fine.
So we are experiencing a lot of this bee washing too during the last, especially, you know, from May onwards, because, you know, during, you know, the 20th of May, the World Bee Day. So that's when, you know, everything starts. So you have to adopt a hive, because if you adopt a hive, you save the bees. You have to buy this shoes, because if you buy these shoes, you save the bees. You have to buy this shampoo, because if you buy it, you save the bees. And I still have to understand the connection between shoes and shampoos and bees. But anyway, so there's always, you have to buy something from us, and you will save the bees. And we believe it's something like, well, it's obviously, you know, profitable for the company, because they, you know, the whole PR thing, you know, the public relation thing is good for them, because they seem like they care for the environment. And for the, you know, the customer side, it's also good for them, because you know, they take out some money from their pockets, and they do something just like that because they have no idea what to do, you know, what to really do to save the bees. And during the last, we have started Vitamina B around 5 to 6 years ago, and during these years we have started to develop our, you know, our minds as well, you know, our thoughts around this thing. And the more we go on with Vitamina B, and the best suggestion, the best advice that we can give to people who ask us, what can I do to save the bees, is plant some flowers. If you have like a balcony, put some flowers. Use like rosemary, thyme, oregano, things like that you can also use in your kitchen, because, you know, you can't cook in Italy without rosemary sometimes. I mean, so that's the best thing. You know, you can use the plants to cook, and you also help, you know, a little bit to save the bees. If you have a garden, plant some flowers. Don't mow your lawn every single day. Just let those flowers grow, because it's easier, and it's easier for you and for your pockets as well, because keeping bees is costly, especially starting, you know, beekeeping is costly because you have to buy everything. But it also gets costly because you have to treat the bees against Varroa, or you have to keep them, you have to watch them, because sometimes people think that, you know, I can put a hive in my garden and that's it. That's not it. That's not it, because that's very dangerous. It's dangerous for yourself, because if you don't know how to keep the bees, you can get hurt. But it's dangerous for other beekeepers as well, because if you don't treat your bees, if they get ill, the illness can spread, Varroa spreads and everything, so you have to keep them. But some people are just like, yeah, I'm gonna put like a couple of hives in my backyard and that's it. No, we have spoken to so many people about that.
You also talked about in the article that they found the hives in the dumpster.
Yeah.
Right? So
we have found them. We have not found them in the dumpster, but when we were like doing a walk here around, you know, the river, we found like 4 or 5 hives that were completely abandoned. We have no idea if they were like kept in some ways, but anyway, they're abandoned, and you know, keeping bees does not help to save the bees if you don't do it correctly. So there's no correlation between the two things. You have to be very
absolutely
careful.
Right. I like to tell people that keeping honeybees to save the bees is the same as keeping chickens to save the birds.
Yeah.
Like yes, they are similar creatures, but honeybees have been doing okay around the world. Even though it's really difficult and expensive these days to keep colonies of honeybees alive, they are so necessary for agriculture and livestock, and also so interesting for people as a hobby that we put the money into them. And the numbers of honeybees around the world has increased a lot in the last 50 years. Even during the periods where we thought all the bees were dying, now the bees we're really worried about, just as you said, we're worried about the wild bees. And your advice is so good, to put flowers wherever you can, and when possible, put local flowers, because these animals evolve to coexist. And when I mentioned the honeybees doing so well in Western Canada, it's because they have access to the same flowers that they evolved with back in Europe. So alfalfa, sweet clover, canola, dandelions, those are all here now, and that's what feeds the bee. Where you are, there are honeybees, so you also have natural alfalfa and natural sweet clovers and so on, but there are so many other bees, and in the whole world there are 20,000 species of bees. So with 20,000 different species, each one has a different lifestyle. They look at different types of flowers. Some of them can work lots of flowers, some only can work one species. And we need them all if we want to keep things balanced. If we want to have a healthy environment, we need a very broad biodiversity. So the biodiversity means the variety of different types of biological creatures, and that's both animals as well as plants. So if a person wants to do what they can to save the bees, and this is saving not the abeille, but the other bee, the wild bee, then they need to plant as many locally found flowers as possible to feed the local varieties of bees. They could also, you mentioned not mowing the grass, at least not every day. And until you get a letter from your neighbor, which happens here, we let our grass grow a bit wild. I think in general, North Americans are the worst with this, that we like our perfectly flat, green, nice, monotonous monoculture lawns, and we put enough chemicals on them to keep other weeds from growing, and those weeds, of course, are the natural plant that should be there. If you can allow some, what we call here, I call it rough space. Rough as in being unimproved, not taken care of. And in our own backyard, behind me, we have a cluster of small bushes and trees that we never do anything to. We just let it grow however it wants to grow. And the ground itself, it has holes in it from different types of animals. And those holes are good for the wild bees to hibernate during the winter. So if you want to do more to save the wild bees, then planting local types of flowers and keeping some area, if you have access to a backyard of some sort, to have some area where it's just natural.
For example, my father in Tuscany, he has a very, very small farm, and he keeps chickens and things like that, and he plants his own vegetables because he's retired, both my mom and my dad. And my first beekeeping experience was at my dad's farm, because Luca gave me a colony and a hive, so I was keeping my
because
first.
that's what a boy does when he likes a girl. He gives a beehive.
Yeah. And I kept my hive in my father's small farm, and then I moved here. So I brought my hive from Tuscany to here, and my dad was like, "But you have taken the bees away, and what's going to pollinate my salad, my peaches, my strawberries?" And I was like, "The wild bees, because there is this kind of connection that only honeybees pollinate." And that's not true. And I explained to him that there is a whole plethora of wild bees that are going to help your own small farm, and plus there is a beekeeper like 100 meters from here. So I mean, you still have the bees. They are not my bees, but they are bees that belong to a friend of ours. So it's still somewhat,
They'll certainly be in his garden if they want to be.
And we went there some weeks ago, and the whole farm was full of solitary bees, wild bees, everything. You could see the whole army of bees, pollinating my dad's farm, and we're happy about that.
Yeah. I think he'll be fine if he and many of his neighbors have similar small acreage, small farms. Then that's perfect.
They are surrounded by vineyards, olive trees, and there is a whole forest. Well, it's not a forest because it's not that big, but that's like pine trees and things like that. So it's the countryside, the Tuscan countryside, as you can think of it. Hills and vineyards and olives.
I've never been there. I'd love to go there. Does he have an extra room in his house?
Yeah, because I left, so you can stay in my bedroom.
So I can get your room. Okay.
We know that you have a blog, which is badbeekeeping.com, if I'm correct.
Yeah, Bad Beekeeping Blog.
All right.
So it's 3 B's, badbeekeepingblog.com. And yes, it's been neglected a little bit lately. I've only posted a few times in the last few months. I really enjoy working on it, but I've gotten so busy with so many things. I am still a master's student at the University of Calgary, and I'm supposed to be writing and doing my final statistical analysis and doing my writing. And it's a very big project. My work involved looking at bumblebees, honeybees, and solitary bees. And I think, if you don't mind, I can tell you in a few minutes some of the background on what the experimental work is.
Please go ahead.
Okay, I'd really like to. So thank you. What I decided to do was to make a map of all the known honeybee colonies, kept bees, urban backyard honeybee hives in the city of Calgary. And there are about 300 apiaries in the city. So some of these apiaries are closer together, and some of them are in areas where a lot of people don't keep bees, and then some further a kilometer away is a colony or two. So from that, I was able to make a density map. Where are the most honeybees? Once you have that information, you can try to figure out why are the bees more dense in one area than another. If they're more dense in one area than another because they make more honey, and then beekeepers say, "Whoa, I want to keep bees because I'll make lots more honey," that would tell you one thing, but it wouldn't be very helpful in knowing what the environment around it is doing for the native bees. So I had to find a way to subtract the environment away from how well the bees do, and then see how well the native bees do in each of those areas.
All right.
To make it, that sounds a little unclear. But what it means is I I studied why people keep bees in Calgary. And the urban beekeepers are not keeping bees just because they can make lots and lots of honey. They're keeping it mostly because they enjoy it and as a hobby. And unfortunately, about half of them are keeping them because they want to save the world's bees. So once I had that map done, then I could say, okay, we have a lot of bees in this area. So do we have a lot of bumblebees, or are there fewer bumblebees than there are in another area where there are not so many honeybees? And all of this is statistics. And you have to account for the different landscape, the different environment, and also the success of the honeybees in different areas, and try to determine if the distribution of wild bees is influenced by the distribution of the honeybees. And to some extent they are, but not to a large extent. Only where we have the highest density of honeybees, we find a bit of a decline in the density of the wild bees. So that was important. Another thing that I did as part of my research was I had honeybee hives placed in locations around the city, far away from each other, that I could enter and remove the pollen from the hive itself. So I was taking pollen in the summertime from honeybee hives, and I established bumblebee nests at the same location. So I could open up my bumblebee nests and dig down inside the little round cups that the bumblebees make and remove a tiny bit of pollen from them. And then I was able to look at the pollen from the honeybees and compare it with the pollen from the bumblebees to see whether or not they're working on the same flower. Because all the pollen is different depending on what flower it comes from. It has a different shape, a different color, a different size. You can learn to distinguish between them. And I was able to do that with the bumblebees and the honeybees. And what I found, which was very, very interesting and important to me, was the honeybees were flying out of the city of Calgary to the rural areas where they could find the canola and alfalfa and sweet clover in greater quantity than they could closer to the beehive. That tells me that honeybees are not particularly good at pollinating a small backyard garden, but are better looking for a huge field. Because, you know, they send scout bees out. The scout bee has to get excited and say, hey, there's a lot of food in this spot. And then all the bees, even if it's several kilometers, the bees will fly that far to collect, rather than going, oh, here's a small plant, and then here's a pepper plant over here. And, you know, it's just a different way that the bees work. Meanwhile, the bumblebees, their pollen was almost entirely from backyards and wild native flowers inside the city. So the range of a bumblebee when she is foraging is about 600 meters. That's the average. Actually, it's closer to a maximum than an average, 600 meters. But the honeybees, the maximum was closer to 7 or 8 kilometers. So they could fly these different distances and focus on different kinds of plants. To me, that was maybe the most interesting result that I had from all of my study, was the fact that the honeybees are looking for these other plants and not interfering as much in a backyard. It will be different in different areas.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
But for us, that was the result.
We have a whole movement of, you know, urban beekeeping here in Italy. I mean, you have that in Canada and the US as well. And some of those urban beekeepers, they say that their honey is better than the honey produced in the countryside because there is less pollution. Is that what you were trying to say?
Yeah.
There's less pollution and there is more variety in trees and flowers and everything. So there's that's what you wanted to say?
Yeah, it will be interesting to see if it's the same that you observed, if it's the same here in Italy, because who makes this type of honey in the cities? say that there's a lot of diversity inside the city, but I don't think that they have data about the fact that they pollinate in the city or outside the city.
Right. I would think, although I can't know for sure, but my idea would be that in a city in Italy, they are going to be correct on some aspects in that the cities are now cleaner than the countryside. Isn't that surprising? 100 years ago, the cities were so smoky and dirty and had, pollution from lead and arsenic and other chemicals. Yeah. And now we've done all we can to make our cities better and have less pollution. And meanwhile, the countryside has become less clean because of the chemicals used for farming and the monoculture. So in that aspect, I would agree with them. However, we know that honeybees tend to work large acreages and not so much single flowers.
Yeah.
For two reasons. One is the forager bee is responsible for guiding the workers to a good source of food. And the second one is the bees, honeybees, when they fly out, they want to work one type of flower on each trip. So they're not going to stop at one pepper plant in a backyard and then go to one cucumber plant and then go to one geranium flower. They want all geraniums or all peppers or all acacia or all linden trees. And where you are, I haven't been where you are, south of Venice, but I'm guessing that there are parks that are sometimes full of white flowers from the acacia. And you would probably stand under those trees and hear the buzz of honeybees during May, the month of May maybe. And then during June or July, some other area, there might be a street lined with linden trees. You know what the linden is I'm talking about?
Yeah.
It's a beautiful tree too. And that means that the honeybees are looking for a nice source of lots of flowers at one time. But maybe in August, when the acacia and the linden are finished, then maybe there's a field of alfalfa for some farmer and that might be 6 kilometers from the city beehive, but the bees are going to go find it if that's where the honey's coming. This is all interesting. This is so interesting. So I have about one more year in my research, and then I should be finished writing and have everything done. And I'm hoping to publish a couple of papers from my work and more. I'm rewriting my bad beekeeping book. So I have that on the go. And that blog you mentioned, that Bad Beekeeping blog, all one word, .com, is where I need to work again just to keep it up to date. But I tend to write more about society and bees than about practical advice, though I have both. I do that too. So I'm keeping plenty busy. And before we go, I also want to say that I've been following your work, and I receive your updates, I think about every week or so. And my wife can read Italian, so I give it to her sometimes and say, "What are they saying here?" and I like your work, so I'm very happy that you're doing this, and hope that you have a lot of success.
Yeah, we hope so too, because what we are trying to do is not to write or to speak for other beekeepers, but we are trying to speak to the general public, because, I mean, there are loads of books about beekeeping, blogs about beekeeping, you know, the practical side, as you were saying before.
Yes.
But there is almost no one that talks about, you know, lead and lead in honey, like we did, or the history of American beekeeping and all the whole rabbit hole of almonds and bees, and the use of honey during the war. And that's something that's very that's interesting for us, because I mean, as I said, we don't want to talk to beekeepers because, as you said before, I mean, they tend to grow the fish bigger and bigger and bigger as they speak, and we are not interested in that. I mean, we also have beekeepers following us, and you know, that we talk to,
and they're not all like that,
no,
but it does. There are enough that you just kind of feel like, okay, I think you found a good spot. It's an important one, and everybody could talk about how to put a new queen into a hive. And everybody who does write about it will have a different idea. But when you talk more general about what the politics of bees and the health benefits of the bee industry, that's good. I like that. So I'm going to keep following you. Who knows, maybe I'll even learn some Italian.
Hopefully. Thank you very much, Ron. And I think...
How many years you kept the blog active?
Oh, a lot of years. That blog is about 25 years. I started in 1998, I think it was. Either 96 or 98. I would have to look it up, but it's been about 25 years of writing on the internet.
Oh my God. That's a long time.
So for people that are listening, they can find a lot of material to read. On
your blog, on your 25 years old blog, there's a lot to read. But anyway, I think we... do you have any more questions?
No.
All right.
I think that we can...
I think that we can end the interview here. And
this has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
For us too, because we didn't expect to get, you know, to almost 2 hours, you know, the whole interview. And we are so happy to have you here and to hear all that you had to say, and I don't know what to say anymore.
Well, let's stay in touch. Let's stay in touch. I appreciate this. It's nice to meet you, and let's stay in touch. And I occasionally come to Europe, and now I know somebody that I can... your father is over...
free room.
No. I would like to meet you someday. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and we hope to get to Canada someday, you know, between work and beekeeping, because I mean, the blog and beekeeping is not our first job. We also do something else, you know, to pay the bills.
Yes, I
because this does not pay the bill.
But you're doing a wonderful job with your hobby.
Thank you very much. And talk to you soon.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Ed eccoci giunti alla fine di questa lunga intervista. Se questo video vi è piaciuto, mettete un like e condividetelo. Se volete seguirci sul nostro sito o sui nostri social, li trovate tutti nella descrizione. Grazie mille per essere stati con noi e alla prossima!
Are you having some difficulties with recording?
We're having the cat here that's wanting some of our attention. So.
Oh, let's see the cat, please. I want to see your cat.
Yeah.
Oh, now I see it. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So it says, look, you guys have been at this for 2 hours. What about me? Yeah. Oh, there we go.
Okay.
What's the name?
Mario.
Mario. Okay, that's good.
The most common Italian name. We have given it to our cat.
It's a big cat, too.
I'm sorry about that, but